Yeah, before that, I was based in India for 29 years.
Okay. So yeah, so how did, maybe we'll just go ahead and jump in. So how did you get into Buddhism?
Well, I was always interested in Asian type of topics. When I was 13, I started doing yoga with some friends and read whatever was available at that time, which was basically just Alan Watson, Suzuki.
Yep.
And then when I went to university, I started out first at Rutgers University in New Jersey, studying chemistry, actually. And there I was taking an elective, which was on Asian civilization. And in it, it spoke about, because I was interested in that, and in it, they spoke about how Buddhism, and one of the lectures, how Buddhism went from India to various countries and spread throughout Asia. And this was something that sort of went, boing in my mind. And this is something that I would really like to study and pursue. So that increased my interest. And then that professor in this course, this was in my sophomore year, said that there's a new program opening up at Princeton University to open up their Asian languages department for other students, because they didn't have very many students and they had quite a large staff. And so I applied to that for Chinese studies and was accepted. So this was in, what year would that be? That would be 1963. And then I went they sent me to Harvard Summer School to start my intensive Chinese, and then to Princeton, and then the next summer to Stanford Summer School for classical Chinese. And then I decided that I would, there wasn't really anything for me back at Rutgers. So I asked them if I could spend my senior year at Princeton as well. And they said, sure, but the degree would have to be given from Rutgers. Otherwise, it looks like we're stealing students. So I did that and started Japanese there, and then went to Taiwan the next summer and started Harvard graduate school in '65 for my MA in Chinese studies. But along, I was studying, I took courses in the history of Buddhism and these sort of things. So then I did my master's in Chinese, but I had already, I was focusing on how Buddhism was transformed as it went to China, basically. Yes. So how the Indian philosophy affected Chinese Buddhism, the Chinese Buddhism, and how Chinese Buddhism then affected the Chinese philosophy after that. I started Sanskrit as well in order to get more on the Indian side. Yeah. And then for my doctorate, I did a joint degree between the Sanskrit and Indian Studies Department and the Far Eastern Languages Department. For that, I started studying Tibetan back in 1967, and Robert Thurman had returned. He had been in India, studied with Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and others, and had been a monk for a short time, and then dropped that and came back to Harvard. And he was in all my classes, and he told me about, so we became good friends, and he told me about all what he had been doing and studying in India, and that it was possible to go there. The Tibetans were there now as refugees. So when it came time to do my thesis, the PhD thesis, I chose a topic in Tibetan Buddhism and applied for a Fulbright to go to India. And I was granted that and went to India in '69 and started studying there. And after studying there for 2 years with Geshe Ngawang Targe, I met His Holiness Dalai Lama very early in '69. And it really struck me that everything that I had been studying was for real. It was alive. It wasn't just a matter of professors trying to figure it out like a grand puzzle with the commentaries. And I decided that I would like to stay and continue my life there and work there. At that time, His Holiness had built the library in Dharamsala. He asked Geshe Targe, I was his first Western student, to become the teacher there. And the two young Rinpoches that I was, that were helping me, translating for me, then became the translators there. And I said, if I could help, I would, be very happy to do that. And His Holiness said, yes, but hand in the dissertation first and then come back. So I did that. And everything continued from there.
And this is at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives. You were the
Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, in Dharamsala.
You were the first Western student.
Well, no, I was the first student of Geshe Ngawan Targe.
Oh, okay.
And that was 2 years before they opened the library, based on that experience of him teaching me. And after the first year, I told my childhood friend, Jonathan Landau, that this is too good to miss. You've got to come. So he came and joined. And so we were the first two Western students that he had. And and we already were translating short texts that His Holiness asked us to do as a team. And so on that basis, His Holiness asked Geshe Targe to be the teacher. And I volunteered to continue with at the library to continue doing translations there. And then we opened the translation bureau at the library.
So there's so much there. Maybe we could back up a little bit. So when you were at school, when you were in the West at Rutgers and then Princeton, were you practicing, or was this mostly just academia? Like, were you meditating?
It was just academia, because there was no teachings or available that of it as a living tradition. Now, once I started studying Tibetan at Harvard, then Bob Thurman told me about Geshe Wangyal in New Jersey. And I grew up in New Jersey, in Paterson, New Jersey. And where Geshe Wangyal was not very far from my home. So when I would go home from Harvard to visit my mother, then I would go down to Freewood Acres, where Geshe Wangyal lived at that time, and met him, hung out a little bit there, but I never had enough time to be able to study with him. So I was not able to, learn any meditation or anything like that. I just sort of imagined, what the practice could be like. But I studied primarily the languages, the history, and the philosophy as it was understood by the professors at that time.
Yeah, and it wasn't any particular strand of Buddhism. You were just looking at all of it at this point: Japanese, Chinese, Zen.
Well, I never really got into Japanese Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism. I was interested in Indian Buddhism and how it was understood in China, so Chinese Buddhism. But when I started studying, I was always very drawn to Central Asia, to Tibet and Mongolia, these so-called inner regions. And there wasn't very much available about Tibetan Buddhism. At that time, the only things available about Tibetan Buddhism were Evans Wentz and Lama Govinda. There was nothing else. So it was a completely unknown area, an unknown topic. The professor with whom I studied Tibetan, Nagatomi, was a very, very learned Japanese, but he had no idea how Tibetan was even pronounced. So we, and the only grammar book that was available explained Tibetan grammar in terms of Latin grammar, which has nothing to do with Tibetan.
Wow.
So, and he taught it to us based on Japanese grammar, actually. So, and there were, a few people in the class already had some Japanese, so we could study it and learn it that way. So when I went to India, I had no idea how to speak Tibetan or even how to pronounce it. So like an anthropologist, I had to figure out the sound system. Yeah. And then I had lessons in the beginning on the spoken language and eventually learned how to speak, how to understand. There were no textbooks at that time for spoken Tibetan. Oh. This was way before any of that. And, way before, people even knew of all the different traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, or, before Jewel Ornament of Liberation or anything was translated and available. Yeah,
it's such a remarkable journey that you started here and then you found out about Tibetan Buddhism. There's nothing on it, and then you end up in Dharamsala when you did. Can you tell us a little bit of like what was that like, Dharamsala in the 60s?
Well, Dharamsala in the 60s was, to give you an idea, where I first stayed in Dalhousie. I went to India on the Fulbright, and I I met within the first few days somebody at Tibet House, this cultural thing that was in Delhi at the time. Mm-hmm. And he said, I have a home in Dalhousie, and I am not going to be using it for the, from now on. If you would like it, you could have it.
Oh, wow.
So, he was a hippie guy, very much. Those were the hippie days. Yeah. And so I went up there and I found, I didn't actually know that they were there, but the two young Rinpoches who had been in Freewood Acres with Geshe Wangyal and Bob Thurman, that they were there. So I connected with them, and this was the connection. And so with them, I was able to study. But the people who were around me in that time were the ex-girlfriend of Bob Dylan and an ex-manager of the Rolling Stones. Joseph Goldstein was there.
Wow.
Tenzin Palmo was just down the road. Mm-hmm. The head of one of the traditions of the Sikhs were there. Mm-hmm. Goenka gave his first course to Westerners there while I was there. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of the, forerunner, where the pioneers, were all at. It was, a wonderful time.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Wonderful time.
Yeah. So you just really got a nice direct look at Tibetan Buddhism.
As I said, I met His Holiness within a month or two.
Remarkable.
Of arriving there. Mm-hmm. And then I went with the two Rinpoches, Sharpa Rinpoche and Kamlung Rinpoches, to, first I went to Benares, to where that hippie who had given me the house was, to sort of check out the Sanskrit scene there. Yeah. And Benares was wonderful at that time. It was a city of bicycle rickshaws. There were no cars.
Wow.
And still very, very traditional. I mean, India was it was like being in the colonial days when I was in India at the beginning. There were no phones. You had to, if you wanted a phone, you had to go down to the post office and book a Grand Trunk call, for the next, couple days, maybe it would, you would get an appointment, and it would be ridiculous to try to call outside of India or anywhere else. And to write home to America, to my family, it would take a month for the letter to get there and another month for a letter to get back. So it really was like being in the colonies.
Yeah, you got a nice peek.
Wonderful experience.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, almost like you got
totally different world. Totally different world.
there's a peace and settledness in that too, where you can't make contact with the people back home. You're just there. You were just in it.
Right.
Yeah, that's so nice.
Right. So it was, as I said, I met His Holiness, and then I saw that it was all for real. And then with after going to Benares, then I went to Kathmandu, which was quite a scene at that time, I must say. You know, it was, Kathmandu had about maybe 100 yards of paved road. Aside from that, it was all mud with pigs and dogs and waste. While I was there, His Holiness Karmapa gave the first black hat ceremony. So I was at that, you know, the first black, two, you know, publicly. Again, if you wanted to go anywhere, you had to walk.
Yeah.
You know, and that was it. You know, so, you know, to Pokhara, I mean, I didn't go, but to Pokhara or Everest or anything like that, you had to walk to get there. Then after that, went to Bodh Gaya, met up with the Rinpoches again, and went to teachings with Ling Rinpoche, was teaching at that time, met His Holiness's tutors. You know, I mean, you could meet anybody at that time. And then I went on a grand pilgrimage with the two Rinpoches, and sort of, I mean, I was always hanging out with the Tulkus, with the young Rinpoches. And I was sort of like their pet Westerner that they took around with me, you know, and I would sit in the corner and sort of watch what was going on, which was all completely otherworldly. And, you know, every now and then, you know, they would talk to me and engage me. But we went on the full pilgrimage course, which was wonderful at that time. I mean, all these places are so built up now.
Yeah.
But when we went there, I mean, there was nothing, you know. So, you know, Bodh Gaya was extremely primitive, underdeveloped, full of pigs and dogs and waste and lepers. Anyway, it was a very exciting time. Very, very exciting time.
And you were primed for it. So you had been doing all this study. Like, so when you went, you were like a serious
I had all the languages.
Yeah.
I had the, well, I didn't have the spoken Tibetan, but I had written Tibetan
background.
And I had the background of Chinese and Japanese, which helped me figure out the sound structure of Tibetan, you know, in trying to learn the language without any textbooks or explanations.
Yeah. But you were serious and you were dedicated, and I'm sure they saw that, and so you just became part of the.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was a super intense, you know, Harvard student. Harvard PhD student. You know, I was very, very intense.
But it's nice, the combination. You know, it's not just academic. Like, you actually get on the plane, you go there, you're living in these very rural situations, and you're continuing with your academia, but also dealing with the adventure of the whole thing. That those two things together are such a nice combination.
Well, yeah. Well, also from the very beginning, you know, once after this pilgrimage, then I went back and I eventually started studying with Geshe Ngho and Targe, and then I started meditation. So that. Well, actually, even earlier than that, because I had received some initiations quite early, and I had some meditation commitments from that, which I always took very, very seriously. So it wasn't just academic, not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Right. Yeah. And so you said a couple of times it was for real. So I got there and I saw that. Can you explain what you mean by that? Like, that it was for real?
Well, for real means that it wasn't a dead subject like ancient Egyptian studies, which was the way that it had been approached at university at that time, because they had no access to the living tradition. So they assumed that it was dead. So I saw that it was alive. Here were people who actually knew what things meant and weren't just guessing. So that convinced me that, you know, this is the people that I want to spend my life with and learn from.
Yeah. So you saw a quality there that you were interested in. You kind of had a vague notion of it in the States, and you saw it as a living tradition and something you could cultivate as a path.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you maybe talk a little bit about that? Like, so I think people have a general, have a general understanding of Dharma or Buddhism, but what aspect exactly drew you to it once you were there? Like this idea of, get into a little bit of the weeds, I guess, like the philosophy of mind, that, or was it more like the language? Like what was it about it that drew you in further and you took seriously as a daily practice?
Well, it gave explanations for things that I had no other explanation for.
Yeah.
In terms of how things, in terms of karma, for example, in terms of how things turned out in my life. Without trying at all of a sudden, within a week, I had a house, I had teachers, I had, everything just fell from the sky like that. I lived with a Tibetan monk who basically, took care of me, gathered wood from the forest, and in order to build a fire to cook, and we communicated at that time, basically just writing Tibetan to each other. But then eventually I had Tibetan, actually it was Sherpa, live with me, and he knew English, but I paid him not to speak English, but to speak with me in Tibetan, but allow me to ask questions, what I didn't understand.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful.
Yeah.
That was very helpful.
So did you ever
So
have
what attracted me?
Yeah.
I was saying what attracted me was that it explained things that I didn't understand or have any other explanations for, but also it gave fantastic analysis of how the mind worked, and also with the disturbing emotions and all of that, connected with how it linked with karma. But also what I liked very, very much were the vows, especially the bodhisattva vows, because and the different points of advice from Lojong, that mind training, that it actually gave guidelines of how to best interact with others.
Yeah.
I was not terribly, what shall we say, socially mature from my academic, my university days, and it really gave wonderful guidelines of how to interact with people.
Yeah.
So I was very attracted to that. But when I studied, what I did for my dissertation was the oral teachings of Lam Rim, the graded stages of the path. This was before jewel ornament or anything was available. And the way I studied it was the traditional way. I had absolutely no idea what was the extent of the material or what came next. So each piece, I just had to digest and work with by itself. And that was very good. I mean, so things like voidness, I didn't find out until the end.
Yeah. It's like this step-by-step piecing together, almost like an adventure. Like you get a little piece, you work it out, get a little understanding, and then it opens the door to the next one.
Yeah, and mind you, I was translating and writing it, for the dissertation.
Yeah.
So in those days, those were the days when Carlos Castanedas's books were being written and started to be available. And so the general feeling that I and others who were there at that time, the few others who were there had, was that we were on a similar adventure as Castanedas, learning something that was secret, that was not secret, but hidden, that was not known in the world. And I mean, it's just a great adventure
Yeah. Yeah.
and tremendous amount of fun.
Yeah. It's fun. Exactly. Yeah. We could always wonder, why, I mean, I have my own ideas or opinions, but why so many hippies, like you said, Dylan's ex-girlfriend and you, like, what was there is this sense of adventure to the whole thing, this
Well,
exploration.
it was before the hippies, actually.
Yeah.
The hippies only came a couple of years later.
Oh, okay.
These were the trendsetters.
The
who were
pre-hippies.
the pre-hippies.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
pre-hippies.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dharma has this.
I mean, mind you, of course, there were one or two, early hippies, but it wasn't like how it became some years later.
No, then it becomes a trend and just people go with it just to follow.
Yeah.
Different.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so I think it's still, and it seems to still work this way, even though the times have changed. Obviously, by the time I got to Dharamsala or Kathmandu, it's completely different than when you were there, obviously. So very populated. But still, when you get into Dharma, there's this sense of adventure to the whole thing. Like, what is this? Even though there's many books now, I still feel as though it operates in kind of the same way. Yeah, because I feel like at least in the West, I'm not so sure if you grow up in the culture, but from a Western point of view, we grow up in sense of mind, karma. These ideas aren't expressed, and there's not even vocabulary for a lot of this. So when we start to learn these things, it is an inward journey, but it's also an external journey as far as like finding text to make sense of things and trying to piece things together.
Yeah. I mean, it was the same thing. I mean, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and that was the time of the beatniks.
Mm-hmm.
So, also
Kerouac on the same journey.
Yeah, Kerouac, and yeah.
There's an adventure to the whole thing. So maybe can you explain a little bit of so the concept of mind in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition?
Yeah.
What? So in like I said, in the West, we a lot. It's not really talked about, but if it is, it's sort of very pigeonholed a little bit, like thoughts are mind. That's about it. Consciousness or brain is consciousness. Can you explain a little bit of the Tibetan or the Indo-Tibetan view of philosophy of mind?
Sure. When talk about mind, the Buddhist tradition is not talking about something that is sitting in your head or located in your body. What it's talking about is mental activity. And so it is the individual's subjective experiencing of things. Mm-hmm. It's always has an object, it's an experience of something. Mm-hmm. And it's individual and subjective. And the way that that's described is its defining characteristics are threefold, which are not separate from each other, but a combination of them. So one is the arising of a mental hologram, in the sense that, like in the West, we think in terms of input, like light and sound waves and so on, photons hitting the retina and the mechanisms within the ear, and that then gets transformed into electric impulses and chemical impulses through the neurons, goes to the brain, and what we experience, this is what it's talking about. What do you experience? You experience, the brain puts it together, and it's like an internal mental hologram that appears. So that is, and it's not just a visual, of any of the senses, or it could be non-sensory in terms of thought. Mm-hmm. So this is, and it's, attended by or colored by emotions and all sorts of mental factors like concentration and attention and interest and these type of things, besides constructive, like love and compassion, or destructive emotions like anger and greed, etc., ignorance. So that's one aspect. that process of the arising of a mental hologram is what it means to have a cognitive engagement with something. So it's not just the arising of an image on a mirror, but that is what it means to see something, or to hear something, or to think something. So that's the second aspect of it. I mean, these are usually translated as clarity and awareness, but those are very, misleading translations, because, I mean, they're literal, but unless you go to the definitions of them, you don't know what they're talking about. And then you think it's clarity means being in focus and stuff like that. So those are two ways of describing the same phenomenon. And so the arising of a mental hologram and cognitive engagement, either seeing, knowing, thinking, understanding, not understanding, all of that. Then the third characteristic is merely that. And merely or only that means that there is no separate me, which is observing it or controlling it or out of control with it. And there's no separate entity, some material thing called the mind that this separate person is working on, like pressing the buttons and, makes you look at something or stuff like that. Unfortunately, the way that it appears to us is that there is a separate me that is the author of the voice speaking in our head. And this is, of course, what's called ignorance or not knowing, literally. You just don't know that that doesn't correspond to reality. There is no, it's just a mental representation of the sounds of words. That's all that it is that's going on. So this is what the mind is. It's this mental activity, which is nonstop. So even when we're asleep, that's still what is happening, going on, for experiencing deep sleep.
And so it sounds like this is a problem of not going far enough. Like we get stuck on the first two and we don't get to the third, the merely that.
Well,
it's too subtle. We just don't.
That is a problem that you have very often in mindfulness type of meditation. The way that it's taught in the West is that you become the observer, as if, in a dualistic sense of there being a me sitting back and watching all of this. And observing it. Excuse me.
No problem. So the mindfulness then would basically be just the first level. You'd just be paying attention to whatever arises. The hologram.
Yeah, I mean, it is taking a practice out of its context and just looking at it by itself.
So then how do we
just to be aware without being a separate observer being aware? Which is not easy, actually.
Well, no, there begins the journey. So how do we get to the merely that?
By studying and meditating and understanding voidness of a self, that this appearance that arises automatically of a separate author to the voice of the voice that's going on in our heads, it does not correspond to reality. And so when we talk about voidness or emptiness, as a lot of people translate it, what it means is a total absence. There is no such thing as something that corresponds to how things appear and how we believe that they exist. Because of that, we believe in that appearance corresponds to reality. So there's no such thing. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no me. There's no person. There is a person, but it's not, the person is not something which is separate, unchanging, independent, and exists by itself. There's no parts to it, so it's not changing over time, and can be known separately from the mind and the body and the emotions and so on. I know myself, or I don't know myself. I want people to love me for me, not for, my body or my mind or my money, just to love me as if there were a me that could be loved separately.
Oh, yeah.
So all of that is a fiction, doesn't correspond to reality, but there is a me, of course. It's not that we're, that I'm you or I'm nobody.
Right.
No.
So the me is all
Convention.
all the collective parts. Are we calling the me? Are we going to label that?
No, me is, it's what's called an imputation phenomenon. An imputation phenomenon literally is something which is tied to something else. And so it is, well, like for instance, age. An imputation phenomenon cannot be known by itself, cannot exist by itself, and cannot be known by itself separate from the basis that it's tied to. So age can only be known in terms of the age of something. The age of the body, the age of, this house, object, the tree, and so on. So the self is something like that. It's tied to body, mind, emotions, feelings, all of that. It's not something separate. And as the body and mind and feelings change, so does that. Similarly to how the age changes as the basis passes through, gets older. So that's the self.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
It is what the word me refers to on the basis of, the body, mind, etc. So there's a big difference between what it refers to and what your imagination of it would correspond to. That's nonsense, but it does refer to something.
I liked how you drew a parallel to age there. That I feel like that's a very clear example for people to conceptualize. Oh, okay, age. And self is in reference to the object or the body. There has to be a reference there.
Well, it has to be tied to something, literally. What the word means, it's tied to something.
Right. No, you're right, because most people think self or me, and they very much make this into a concrete object. As somehow it's not part of the body.
Not part of the mind, or maybe it is the mind. That's also a fallacy.
It's very vague, actually, but at the same time, it seems like a concrete experience.
Well, that's ignorance is literally not knowing. You just don't know. It's not that you're stupid. It just means that you just don't know that it doesn't correspond to reality. It's not your fault. It appears like that, seems like that, automatically. Automatically.
Well, and then we're coming from so again, back to a Western culture, that assumption's not challenged. In fact, it seems reinforced.
Well, no, because there's no, and neuroscientists, concur that there's no findable me, inside the brain.
Right. Yeah.
And also the whole Buddhist explanation of mental activity does not contradict the Western physical explanation. Physical explanation with the brain and the nerves and the neurons and the photons and all of that. That is just describing it from a physical point of view. The phenomenon, the event. So you can describe an event from many different points of view. So from a physical scientific point of view, and the Buddhist is talking about the subjective experiencing point of view. And those are fit together. There's no contradiction. It's only appears contradictory when you make the mind into something separate entity, and something mystical like that, spiritual, etc. Then it becomes a problem to fit that together with science. But the Buddhist view is not like that at all.
So yeah, so I mean, we have with the neuroscience and these sorts of things, but the general population and just the general person has a very strong sense of self. I don't know how much they know about neuroscience or have taken this question seriously.
Well, they have a strong sense of ego.
Yeah.
If we can use Western terms,
Mm-hmm.
they, well, it's not just in the West. I mean, it's everybody.
Sure.
Automatically arises that you have what's called self-cherishing.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically are preoccupied with me,
Mm-hmm.
and what I want and what I like, and people should love me. People should pay attention to me.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is important. I mean, this is amplified with social media.
Oh.
What I ate for breakfast is important, and everybody obviously is interested to see a picture of it and know what I ate, or everybody is interested in my opinion about everything.
Mm-hmm.
So this is amplified nowadays with the advent of social media.
Yeah, and this is what I mean, just the average person. And so, do you think so? Let's go back to when you first were introduced to Dharma, and this sort of, at least the first cultural sort of movement in that direction. Do you think the impetus was to deal with this, like what is the self and how do I eliminate it, or
No, my
make sense of
impetus,
it?
no, I'm sorry, I keep on interrupting you
Oh, no,
in the
no,
middle of the
please.
question. No, actually, my interest was basically, this is so fantastic, the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
that what I'm really want to be focused on is being the bridge to transmit it to the modern world. I mean, this is what I studied was at university. How was it transmitted, and how is it understood going from India to China and from India to Tibet?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is what struck me from the very, very beginning, as I mentioned, from that lecture at Rutgers.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I wanted to do in terms of make that bridge for modern times, learning on and relying on the experience that they had, taking it from India to China and from India to Tibet.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, learning about how it went from Tibet to Mongolia.
Yeah. So that's wonderful, and that's interesting as well. So that's a big question, I think. So you saw how it was practiced in Tibet in the early days, almost like in its pure state, I guess you could say. How are we to digest it now? Now, once this bridge has been made, and we're getting it here as modern people in the West, what's the path for us? What's your suggestion on studying the Dharma?
Well, of course, I'm always biased.
Yeah.
I and my team have this website, studybuddhism.com.
Yep.
And it's there that I try to make the teachings available as much, and to make it available in, now we have 32 languages.
Wow.
So as broadly as possible to the world, and do that in graded stages, 3 large sections of the essentials. So the beginner stuff with, what is and how to, that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the intermediate section, Tibetan Buddhism, which goes a little bit more deeply. And then the advanced section, which is a lot of the material is very, very advanced. And we have now almost 13,000 items, articles altogether on the website. Mm-hmm. And also what we have is our YouTube channel, Study Buddhism on YouTube. And there we have made interviews with, must be over 40 different Buddhist teachers, and also some professors, like professors of animal ethics and animal intelligence, and interesting stuff like that. And or now we just put up the interviews that we did with the Nechung, the medium for the Nechung Oracle, where he describes what it's like to go into trance and all of that, how he was chosen. And, I mean, really quite fascinating. And what we've done is only ask one question at a time. So each video is a clip with no more than 3 minutes, sometimes 4, but like that. So they are easily digestible for people who don't have a large attention span. Yeah. And this has become even more popular than the website.
Oh, okay.
We have hundreds of them on there. So this is the way. I mean, this is the big challenge in the modern time, which is too much information. And so if you Google Buddhism, you'll find millions and millions of websites. And just because some people, people are clever IT people in being able to figure out the latest algorithm of Google and be able to get themselves on the first page, Google's algorithm, they change it all the time without really telling you very clearly what it is. That doesn't necessarily mean that those items on the first page are the best items. No. So this is the real challenge of modern time, is to wade through all of that information and all of those choices and find what is authentic and what is garbage. So I try to present, what really is the authentic thing, relying on all the teachings of my teachers. Yeah. I had the great privilege to be able to study with the greatest of the great, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, excuse me, and his tutors. So I studied, I was the interpreter and translator for 9 years of Senshub Serkon Rinpoche, the assistant tutor, and also sometimes translated for Ling Rinpoche and occasionally for Tijang Rinpoche, the senior and junior tutors. So I had, most incredible opportunity. I mean, this is why, and everything I studied, I wrote down. Yeah. So I had very, very extensive notes. And I still haven't published everything. I still have, thousands of pages of stuff that still needs to be worked on.
Yeah, unbelievable. Your site is so dense. It's usually my go-to if I have a question. I'm referring to Dharma in some sense. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'm very happy about how it's turned out. It will. It's about 10 and it's. We had our 20th anniversary. Originally it was called Berzin Archives, and then we decided to rebrand it when the thing had to be recoded and modernized. And we've been online for over 20 years now. And we have about 80 people working on it all over the world.
Yeah. And it's heavily visited?
Yeah.
That's nice.
If we put together YouTube and the website visits, not counting, we also have Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and even TikTok. Yeah. But putting together just the website and YouTube, we have probably about between 8,000 and 9,000 visits a day.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful.
And we reach pretty much every country in the world.
Yeah, you said 32 languages.
Yeah. So His Holiness had encouraged us to do the Islamic languages. So we have all the major Islamic languages: Arabic, Farsi, that's Persian, Turkish, Urdu, Pakistani, Punjabi,
Yeah.
Indonesian, Bengali, etc.
Yeah.
And then a few years ago, we started all the Southeast Asian languages. So we have all the languages of the Buddhist world, and we have about 6 Indian languages as well.
Hmm.
So we have far more Asian languages actually than European ones.
So, what I've always been really many things, but especially the Tibetan pedagogy and their system of learning. When you stay at the monasteries, they're studying and memorizing, and then they're going to class, and then they're debating.
Yeah.
Did you go through that same similar education? And
Well, no, actually,
Mhm.
I although I learned how to read debate texts,
Mhm.
I never did debating, and I was never encouraged to do debating
Mhm.
because, frankly speaking, I would have become what I call a debate monster. So, one of these people that debate, can't stop debating, anything that anybody says, jump down their throat if there's anything illogical about it.
Yeah.
So I had that tendency, I was super intellectual,
Mhm.
coming out of Harvard.
Mhm.
I was one of the top students there. So um, it would not have been good for my personality
Mhm.
to do debating. The way that I studied was that, I went to all these classes with Geishingo and Targe. And then I was, for 9 years with Serkan Rinpoche.
Wow.
And Serkan Rinpoche, as his interpreter, I mean, he was with him, most of the time.
Mhm.
And he would never teach me anything unless I translated it for other people. So, I mean, he really taught me and trained me very much. I mean, he trained my memory, trained me to be, an interpreter and all of that. But I always had to translate for other people. Whatever I did had to be for others.
Yeah.
And this was a wonderful training. So it really depended on what other people wanted to study. The
Yeah.
only thing that he would teach me privately, because he somehow saw I had a special connection with it, was Kalachakra. So I studied like that, basically interpreting and having my memory trained so that I could only write down first after the session, and then he wouldn't let me write anything down until I went home at night. So I
Yeah.
had to remember everything.
Wow.
And this was a wonderful training for being able to then translate sometimes, occasionally, for His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
I remember one time His Holiness was speaking at a press conference, and I was the interpreter. And then someone had a tape recorder and said that, would Your Holiness, he's going to Nepal, would His Holiness please give a message for the Tibetans in Nepal? So His Holiness did, and the press conference continued and so on. And when the whole thing was finished, then the man asked His Holiness, what did you say? And, on the tape. And His Holiness said, Berzin, tell him what I said. So, I mean, to be able to translate for His Holiness, you have to have a phenomenal memory.
Yeah. So sharp.
And His Holiness, of course, speaks very long at a time.
Mhm.
So that was the way that I was trained. I mean, now being 77, my short-term memory is terrible. I couldn't do that anymore,
Yeah.
but I was trained when I was younger to be able to do that. Whenever I was with Serkan Rinpoche, he would stop at any time and say, what did I just say? And I'd have to repeat it.
Mhm.
Or when I would be talking, he would stop me and say, repeat what you just said.
Yeah.
So in that way, you get trained to pay attention and remember.
Yeah. That's excellent mind training as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, he was
Yeah.
incredibly kind to train me that way.
We're here in the West, and people trying to learn Dharma we have Dharma centers and stuff like this, but this level of study, like what you were able to get, obviously would be even rare then, but especially now. But even the normal way of learning, like at the monastery, like learning these more sophisticated topics, like the debate topics, philosophy of mind, karma, like even though if they have your site, I feel like this is better done in a group setting. And do you
Well, yes.
see anything like this unfolding in the West?
Well, yes. I mean, what you need are discussion groups, people debating back and forth each other in terms of clarifying their understanding of something.
Mm-hmm.
That really is up to the students.
Yeah.
To be interested enough.
That's right.
To be able to participate in that. You see, the problem in the West, and I don't see this as something easy to overcome at all.
Okay.
The big limitation, not just the West, but in the modern world in general, is that people have no time.
Right.
They are very busy. They most of them have a job. They come to a Dharma center or lectures that I might give in the evening, and they're tired. They just came from work.
Yeah.
And then they have a family. They have other responsibilities. Not to mention, Netflix and all these other distractions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very difficult to make the time. And Dharma study and meditation and practice takes time. Takes time. You have to put in the effort and the time. So I think this is why His Holiness the Dalai Lama focuses so much on basic human values and what he calls secular ethics. That for the general population, this is where you start, and this is what people have time, and to start it in the education system. Yeah. This, I think, is incredibly intelligent and compassionate way of doing that. And I mean, we started as well. Like I said, 3 levels on the website. It's a funnel. Always would function as a funnel. The largest number of visits are to these early materials, these beginner materials. 11 ways of being helpful to others, 8 ways of dealing with anger. These are the most popular articles. Yeah, and even more popular are these 3-minute videos on YouTube. This is what people have time for, and they give them basic guidelines for how to lead a happier life. And only some of them will go to the intermediate level, and even less will go to the advanced level. And the material is there. A lot of people use it as a reference library, which is fine. So, or an encyclopedia, and that's fine. I think that one has to be realistic in one's expectations based on how much time you have available to put into the study and practice. And, you don't need to, in terms of practice, you don't need to start with, many hours a day. 5 minutes is enough to start with. Just something basic. Yeah. Something very basic.
Yeah. Just learning to slow down and create some space and time in your life. Then gradually, organically, it may lead to more. But this is really, to study Dharma at that level, it's a lifetime dedication, like your whole day structured around it. Like you're a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's still all there. It just depends upon the person's level of interest.
Well, yes. I mean, you provide, what Buddha did. You provide the material, and then it's up to people to actually follow it and practice it, study it.
And you've done him a great service.
It's like you feed the dog, but it's up to the dog to eat it.
Yeah. Well, we owe all of you a debt of gratitude, that first wave of people who go over there and study and then brought it back in such an authentic way. It's really.
We were very, very privileged to be around at that time.
Yeah, I'm so jealous.
I went there, the Tibetans had only been out of Tibet, the refugees had only been out 10 years. So they were still, very much in the beginning phase, and everybody, had studied in Tibet and trained in Tibet. Yeah. And all the old masters were around, and there were hardly any foreigners, hardly any, just a handful.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, at that first black hat ceremony, I don't think there were more than 10 of us. Or at the first Kalachakra initiation also, I think there were no more than 10 or 15 of us. So it's like that.
Yeah, you got the flavor. You just sitting around, be like, what is this? I can't believe we're here. It must have been so electric.
Yeah, well, it was very mysterious also because there were no translations. So we had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
No idea.
A felt sense.
Pardon?
A felt sense. You felt something. You just you couldn't.
Right. And I trained to be a translator and interpreter basically because this stuff is too good to, just keep to yourself. You have to, I wanted to be able to make it available, be able to translate for His Holiness's tutors and eventually for His Holiness. It's just fantastic. So that was the motivation, actually.
Yeah, and I don't think, if you don't, unless you go and study and spend time over there, and you don't get that connection, like exactly what's going on. This whole thing is like an event. It's this whole life. It's this whole other different way of being in the world.
Well, I mean, it's very, very different in India, Nepal now. Very, very different.
Yeah.
So one has to accept that reality and then find ways of, dealing with that. And the teachers are, they have tons of students. And, many of them, at least pre-pandemic, traveled an awful lot. So, you have to adjust. You have to be able to make the time, basically.
Yeah, I think same comes from desire, your desired willingness to do this. And you have to, and I guess that's kind of the big question. It's like, you saw something valuable in it and you changed your whole life to go do this. It's like, what is that? Like, is it like, what is that thing that it offers that people might not quite understand, that if they did, they would be like a light bulb would go off? Because, I think still is, we get yoga studios and mindfulness and this, but that's not quite it, is it?
Well, it's a start.
It's a start. Yeah.
It's a start. I mean, in the early days, people came to Dharma from Lobsang Rampa, and drilling a hole in your head to open up the third eye. So, in those early novels.
Yeah.
So, you got to start somewhere. And I think the only explanation really is that it somehow awakens an instinct or a predilection to this from previous lives. I'm a very firm believer in beginning in his mind. And there's no other explanation.
Yeah.
Certainly no explanation for my life.
Right.
Whatsoever. I mean, I came from background, nobody was, knew about, Asian stuff or had any interest in Asian stuff. There were two other, kids in, that I knew who were interested in yoga, just as a physical thing. But that was quite rare.
Yeah. When you said that, I was surprised at that time.
I was 13 at the time.
In the 1950s.
That was quite rare.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any teacher or anything. I mean, we just played around, basically. trained ourselves to sit in lotus, full lotus, that type of thing, which when you're a kid, you're flexible enough to be able to do. So nothing much else than that. But you have to, why is anybody interested in anything?
Sure.
This is, there's no explanation except, karmic instincts. You can have the same influence from outside sources coming to many, many people, but only some people will respond to it and some won't. And you explain it, in terms of, family and all sorts of other things. But this piece has to be added as well.
Yeah. And it's like, well, what's being, the question is like, what's being presented, because Dharma or whatever, it has so many different flavors, and what the packaging is, depends on, what the person encounters. And, if it's like mindfulness, a lot of times, the common thing now is, it'll help relaxation, help you de-stress. It's almost like a spa.
Pain management.
But then this other thing, I feel like there's almost like you said, this primitive, like call of the wild almost. It's like this whole other adventure thing. Those other things might be inherent, but you running around India in this time and following Circum Rinpoche, it's like, this is not a day. This is not an easy thing you're doing here. You're not doing it for stress management.
I lived very primitively.
Right.
I had no toilet, no water.
Yeah.
Very primitively.
But there you were, and you kept doing it year after year after year after year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I went around the world for many, many years doing various things that His Holiness sent me, for him.
Yeah, remarkable journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then self-transformation, like your understanding of self through this whole thing, I'm sure is radically.
I'm very, I've grown an unbelievable amount, to an unbelievable extent. Especially if I think back when I was a university student, my goodness.
Yeah. So it's a combination of the study, the practice, and the experiential.
And age, of course.
Of course, age. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this, and for doing everything you did and bringing the Dharma to the West, and for us to, I know I've benefited greatly from it, and I shared the site for many, many years with all my students and friends.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. Happy to hear that it is of help. That's the whole purpose.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, Dr. Berzin.